Welcome to another edition of the Corner Booth Podcast here at the Snowdon Deli. I'm Aaron Rand from CJD, along with Bill Brownstein of the Montreal Gazette, and our guest today, Head Executive Director of the Downtown Merchants Association, Glenn Castanheira, and I guess the official title, Official Consultation Director, PR Spokesperson for the Penché restaurant, which is in downtown Montreal. And why we're here to talk about the city's decision to take two areas of St. Catherine Street and pedestrianize those areas. That's really only part of the story. The other part is the city apparently doing this without letting anybody else know. At least according to, we spoke earlier. You were not made aware of this. Glenn, you represent downtown merchants. You were not made aware of this. So we know there's a lot of anger, a lot of pushback. Let's start with that. The consultation process, what happened
What
here?
consultation process?
Was it consultation? What was the column? Was it consulting or insulting?
Insulting.
Right? I think that
And
something
we've
had been written.
through this before, Glenn, and we were talking with parking, if you recall, way back when they said everybody was consulted, and I had to break the news to you about new parking and like nobody mentioned it, brought it up ever, and then sure enough it came in, and they, well, no, we spoke to a lot of people. They didn't speak to you, didn't speak to anybody.
By the way, so let me point out, by the way, the city says, and the mayor said this in a press conference, they've been talking about this for the past 2 years, and they have consulted a variety of people.
Yet to meet one.
But not you. And not you, and
or
you're
anybody
downtown.
else I've ever.
So let's start with that. What happened here, Glenn?
And that's what I love about this format. We can get into deeper and clarify a few things.
Get angry.
And obviously, there's some different definitions of the word consultation. Now, to be clear and very honest, we have been informed of a potential idea of one day creating a pedestrian plaza on St. Catherine. And we were approached, and this is by the services. And you have to imagine 3-4 people coming into our office, kind of like what we're doing here, like, hey, what do you think about closing St. Catherine one day? I say, well, it might work one day, and if we consult and if we get everything together. Okay, ciao, bye, and no more. And we would ask, hey, have you guys involved with this? And we would never confirm. So the fact is, and we can talk about semantics all you want, fact is that the plan that was unveiled last week was never presented to us. And we're talking about the pedestrian sections. It's much more than that. We're talking about completely redoing St. Catherine Street, right? Between Stanley all the way to God. We have never been presented these details. And you know what? Don't take my word for it. The local city councillor, Sanchez, was never made aware of this nor consulted. The Chamber of Commerce was never informed. Ogilvy was never informed of this. Ogilvy that now is going to have a huge project in front of their doors. Sport Experts that has been dealing with construction for the past 7 years has never been made aware of this. The hotels, Ivanhoe Cambridge that owns Place Ville Marie and Montréal Trust were never made aware of this. Eaton Centre had never been aware of this. So unless there's a giant conspiracy that I'm not aware of, there has not been either true or authentic consultations on this.
Okay,
project.
before we go any further, just so for people who may have heard the story but don't really understand this initial phase of what's supposed to happen, can you break down where these two pedestrianized areas are supposed to be?
So still missing some details because yet again it has not been presented to us. We're now reopening the files that are now, mind you, in a call for tender. You know, the city is going forward with this. The contracts are going to be given out in the next months. We're talking about redoing St. Catherine Street and going back where St. Catherine's has already been renovated, so between roughly Mansfield and Robert Bourassa. So think about Eaton Centre. That whole section has just been redone, would be permanently pedestrianized with, we don't know yet what type of mechanism, they say permanently. And then another section between roughly, if you look in Concordia University, all the way to Ogilvy, right? And that whole stretch would be closed down permanently to traffic with an array of permanent furniture that would render the street more like an obstacle course than a pedestrian street.
Okay, that's phase one.
That's phase one.
And you mentioned there's a larger phase here. So you're talking from the Downtown Merchants Association, nothing except, hey, we're thinking of doing this, and never heard from them again. So Fedi, you're at the Penché, downtown restaurant, been there for many, many years. You talk to other merchants, nothing, no consultation, nothing from the city?
Nothing from the city. And the question is, why are we doing this? So what's the purpose of pietonizing St. Catherine Street? We got to begin by that, because there's got to be a purpose. It's not just to decorate and to have people walking around. It's important to remember that right now, and I did this at one point in 2023, I walked around my neighborhood, 2 blocks east, west, north, and south of Le Pois Penché, and counted closed doors. I counted them, I photographed them. 1 business out of 4 was closed around us. 1 business out of 4. 3 of the most important corners of Crescent Street, Crescent and de Maisonneuve, big locations, have been closed for years. And I'm not talking here about a pandemic problem. I'm talking about a problem that persists for more than a decade. There's businesses there that have been closed for more than a decade. So what is the purpose? Is the purpose to revitalize downtown, to re-energize downtown? Because so far, everything has failed. I don't think that the administration has done anything concrete to help the Merchants Association or anybody to revitalize the situation, because 1 out of 4 is unacceptable. So what the city needs to do is create the conditions for business to prosper. And here we're talking about the Golden Square Mile, which was once upon a time the most prosperous neighborhood in Canada. So if we're business people and we're asked to invest or invited to invest in the downtown core, we're not invited to invest in some temporary pop-up Halloween shop or dollar store. We're going to invest millions of dollars to open a new restaurant, to open a new store, a new business, to make it beautiful and nice for the city. If somebody's going to invest that kind of money, they're not doing it for the landlord or for the government. They're doing it for a chance to be prosperous for their families.
It's interesting you say re-energize. What they've re-energized is Laval, the West Island, Distrand, because this is where people are going, because it's such a pain. If you're shopping for anything big, or unless you're doing like a couple of grocery items, going downtown these days without a vehicle on a metro, fine, the metro is great, but you're going to bring it television, you're going to buy anything there. Go into a restaurant, like where there's no parking, where it's an obstacle course, as you say. And yet they fail to understand that this is what the cranks the economic engine is downtown when it's working. This is where they're getting their tax dollars from. They're not getting them from Laval, they're not getting them from Distrand.
Bill, you're bringing a very good point, because I had a chance to meet with the people that have the title of Commissioner to the Economic Development of the city. There's many of them, and nobody knows how many there are. And very often, I've asked this question. I've asked this question at city councilors meeting, even with the mayor present. I've asked this question: if there's a gorgeous restaurant opening in Laval, beautiful place opening in Laval, I asked the mayor directly, and I asked the city councilors. I said, if you live in Montreal, how do you go there on a Saturday night? On a Saturday night, how would you go to this brand new restaurant in Laval from Montreal to have a beautiful date on a Saturday night and come back? How would you do it? And none of them answered by bus, metro, or by bicycle. So I said, you're asking people to do what you wouldn't do yourself.
Right.
I said, that doesn't make sense. Downtown is a destination. Downtown is not Mile End. Downtown is not Plateau. It's not San Henry. It's a destination, and it has different economic conditions to be prosperous. And the most important thing, when Glenn talks about consultations, and by the way, Glenn is the first person, when I ever started to get engaged in city matters, he was the first person, I don't know if you remember this, Glenn, years ago, you were the first guy around 2020 to give me the time of day. You actually picked up the phone and he spoke to me, and he shared a lot of things, and I learned a lot of things.
That's because you can fire me at any time, at any moment.
But
by representing businesses, and that's the thing. You're on an ejectable seat. You have to listen to them, and that's my job.
And when it comes to consultation, we need to consult. I remember one commissioner told me, Monsieur Sanchez, he says, it's not just about business. And I said, okay, but every single door along St. Catherine Street is a business. So,
if I may, I just want to get 2 things here. One, we're talking about, and it's true. We can have this debate with city officials saying Montreal is much more than just businesses, and that is true. But St. Catherine Street isn't just any other street. It is Canada's largest commercial street. It is the number one. It is our Michigan Avenue. It's the thing. So if there's one place where business should be the number one priority, it's St. Catherine. But another thought. Let's say we all agreed that we do want St. Catherine to be pedestrian. Let's say that was our thing. Why not involve the businesses? And that's my point to what Fede just said earlier. about trust. And I don't think a lot of people realize here how important trust is for businesses to invest. When you see businesses like Ogilvy that chose to stay on St. Catherine, let's remember, Holt ran through Ogilvy, one closed, they merged together, and then we had the Four Seasons happen and a huge investment of hundreds of millions of dollars. When you have Ivanhoe Cambridge investing $100 million in revamping Place Ville Marie entrance, it is trusts. When you have sport experts investing over $20 million in that store, it's not just, like you said, a Halloween pop-up store. It's millions, if not billions of dollars invested, and then millions of dollars in taxes that stays for the city.
Exactly.
That resides on trust. Trust that we're going to be working together to ensure the prosperity of those businesses, to then tax the crap out of them to pay for the services that everybody wants or hopes that we would have, such as police, fire services, clean streets, and other stuff.
It's interesting you say that because the other day Peter Trent wrote an opinion column in the Gazette, and his point was, why don't you have politicians who are business people who understand business? And he pointed out that Mayor Plante, prior to becoming mayor, she worked for a nonprofit. She was a tour guide. And he points out a bunch of other people who were musicians, journalists, and all the rest, who were put in these positions. You need somebody who does understand business to be able to understand the woes.
Is that a failing of this administration? I mean, because
Yes.
let's talk about the fact that when we talk about closed doors along downtown, this isn't new. This has been going on now for a while, and the complaint has always been from businesses. You know what? The city doesn't support us. We get nothing from the city. They don't care. They're anti-business, Projet Montréal. That's been the contention. I don't want to say they are or aren't, but you're not seeing that kind of support, and we never have from this administration.
I'm not, and it's actually gotten worse. I truly want to say that we and I personally have always had a very constructive relationship with the city. Our job, especially in my position, is to find the common denominator so that the file can go forward, right? We can agree to disagree and go forward. But to your point, to what you just said, we would need leaders that have been in business. Let's say the opposite. Let's say that we don't want people who know business. The job is to listen to people who do know about business. If you were to reverse roles, we'd have a Mayor Bloomberg at the head of Montreal.
Right.
He would have to consult the community groups to get their point of view. And that's the key here. You need to recognize what you're good at, what you're not so good at, to then surround yourself with what you're not so good at to make yourself better, right? And that, unfortunately, is not what we're seeing here.
So to the point of pedestrianizing, what we started talking about, I believe the city said at one point that residents were consulted, and they thought this would be a great idea. There are no residents living on St. Catherine Street.
No, there aren't, but there are more and more residents in the area. And although we represent the businesses, we survey the residents regularly because they're our number one consumers. They live in the area. We need them. And our data is pretty clear. It's not so much that they want pedestrian streets. They want clean and safe public spaces. And the fact is that the current public spaces that we do have downtown are being run down. I mean, just go take a walk at Cabot Square.
Yeah.
Beautiful square, has just been redone. Good luck bringing your kids there for lunch. I dare you. It's gotten so bad that they've closed the entrance to the metro. Phillips Square was the same thing. Phillips Square was recently redone. We spoke about this a couple years back, but it is a beautiful place, public square, that has gotten prizes from around the world. But not only that, contributes to the confidence of the businesses such as Burke's that has invested hundreds of millions of dollars in that building to say the public space needs to reflect what we're investing in our property. Fact is, only after a couple weeks after inauguration, it was already a no man's land. City was not picking up the trash in it. The grass was not being maintained. So the businesses took their money, the money they gave me, we put into maintaining that square clean and safe and lighting it up during the winter. So my point is, without falling into semantics, I think what people want is public space. We need space. We need clean and safe space. Yeah. And the ones we currently have aren't being properly maintained. So before creating new ones, if that was the intention, let's start by maintaining the ones we currently have.
The Corner Booth podcast is brought to you in part by the Snowdon Deli, serving Montrealers since 1946 and home of the city's best smoked meat sandwich, the Snowdon Deli, DeCarry Boulevard, north of Queen Mary Road. So let me talk to Fedi, to your point specifically as a merchant. So here you are in the middle of downtown, and the one thing we didn't discuss, but it's going to come up, is this idea that you don't want to seem to be anti-pedestrianization. But the thing is, let's try it, see how it goes. Let's also live in the reality that we are a winter city, right? 4 months, 5 months a year. What's going to happen outside when there's nobody there, nobody's walking around, and you're worried about the kind of people you're going to end up seeing downtown?
Well, I was Monday night. I went to an event in the old port, and it was dinner time. It was between 6:30, 7 o'clock, and there wasn't a soul on Place Jacques Cartier. And I mean, nobody was walking there. The restaurants were empty, but because it was cold, it wasn't a nice night. But there was no one there. There was a couple of people begging for money. The first time Glenn and I got to speak, and I remember about this, I asked Glenn one question. I said, Glenn, how come there are no tables and chairs in our parks? Right? There are benches, but there are no tables and chairs. And Glenn explained to me, because he introduced me also to Bryant Park in New York, he explained to me how expensive it is to actually maintain the spaces. So the city very often cites New York, and they cite Europe, Las Ramblas, Madrid, and beautiful places like that where people are walking and all that, as an example as to how much that can revitalize an area. But there's many things that are required in order for that to happen before you put the plants and the benches. First of all, a lot of those activities that you see in Las Ramblas are illegal in Montreal. In Montreal or in New York, you have street food. In New York, you can have kiosks where people sell stuff. When you walk in Las Ramblas, there's kiosks of people buying stuff. There's cafes.
Strictly illegal in Montreal.
There's cafes in the streets. There's tables and chairs that people can move around. Because if you put benches, what you're doing is you're putting beds for the homeless. Nobody likes to sit. Nobody comes downtown to sit under a tree. So what you need to do first is to put together that economic activity, the urban life, what brings urban life, the cafes, the kiosks, the street food, the action, commercial activity in the streets so people can do something in them. And then put tables and chairs. But like Glenn rightfully points out, this is quite expensive. It's an expensive endeavor to do this.
And we can do it. It is possible. And to your question, what are the best practices? And we've heard the mayor cite New York. Well, New York built 70 public pedestrian plazas in record time. You know how? First, by consulting. Second, by working with the business community. And third, by testing it out. Each project is a pilot. They adjust. They gather data. Who was it good for? Who was it bad for? What happened? Then they adjust. And then they repeat until they get it right. And when they get it right, they deploy. And so when you go to Meatpacking District, Bryant Park is the best example. Bryant Park was a no man's land. Bryant Park today is the best example of public-private partnership. But that's because the city who owns the land makes a deal with the private sector and says, we are the owners of this land, but then the businesses, you'll be the stewards, and we'll work together.
Why don't we do this? Is this an ideological issue that we don't want to get involved with private partnership? Why
and I still haven't gotten the answer to that, because when the mayor made her announcement, to our surprise, I was feeding my baby at home. We have a newborn baby at home, so we didn't know what this was coming. Made a few calls. What the heck is going on? And then I explained that you do understand that we can try this before you make the announcement. I'll gladly help you. And the answer I get from City Hall is, we need to get this done now. And I never understood why. I still don't have the answer.
She wants to finish
That's the only
everything.
answer that I'm given elsewhere for, is that, well, there's a deadline, which is next year's election. But it's unfortunate because, again, and if you're listening to this and you want to see St. Catherine be pedestrian, there is a way to do so, as we've done in Quartier des Spectacles. This is exactly, and we know the recipe. We've tested it, we've adjusted it, we've worked around it, we've gotten partners to invest, we've paid for a lot of animation, because that's also very important. You need to have it vibrant all the time. And now it's permanently pedestrian. We can do that elsewhere.
This is epidemic in the city. We're talking downtown. Look at Saint-Hubert.
Plaza Saint-Hubert,
Same
yes.
thing. It's a disaster. Look at, Mount Royal. She decides, well, no cars anymore, and this is going to be disastrous. Not according just to.
Is this
the consultation?
Yeah.
This is
and
her way or the highway? Is that where we are on this?
Pretty much.
I still don't have a clear
There's
answer.
no consultation is the point on any of these. Like everywhere you go, whether it's a bike path, whether it's Mount Royal, whether it's St. Hubert, whether it's St. Catherine, there is no consultation. It's like, this is the mandate I have, this is my vision, and that's all that matters.
And to be fair, I mean, we don't have to consult for everything.
No.
Right? I mean, I think we can consult on broader
Closing Mount
images.
Royal, St.
and then-
Catherine Street, you have to consult.
And there you go. And that was my answer to the administration. I mean, because the answer was, Glenn, we don't have to consult publicly for everything. True, but we're not talking about a green alley in Lachine or a corner street in Rosemont. We're talking about Canada's #1 largest commercial street. It requires a buy-in from everyone. But I need to go back to the fact that to all my conversations I'm having with the city right now, there are a lot of question marks. And I have a lot of informal conversations, right, to try to understand what's happening. And there's a lot more question marks than there are answers.
We haven't heard since this story broke. It's over a week now. Haven't heard anything from the city in terms of we understand. We've heard from the merchants. We've heard from the Downtown Association. There has been nothing. It's been radio silence. And I kind of wonder, what does that mean going forward? Is this a fait accompli?
Well, so in a way it is, because again, the contracts are being given. There's a call for tender, a public call for tender now. It's a $100 million contract. It's important to know that everybody understands. It's a $100 million contract, or $90-odd million contract. And there are companies now preparing a bid on it. And that's a final contract, which means that even if the city were to recognize this as a mistake, because experts I'm speaking to, because it's not just us merchants, we're speaking with architects, urbanists. Richard Bergeron, the founder of Projet Montréal, has said this is a bad idea. And he's for pedestrianizing St. Catherine Street, just not this way.
Right.
If the future administration, which will not be Madame Plante, it might be Projet Montréal, but if a new administration comes in, realizes this is a mistake, wants to fix it, it's going to cost us a heck of a lot of money to reopen that contract and fix it. So it is going forward. I am aware of certain groups, not us, that are evaluating legal measures to ensure that proper consultation is done prior to this contract being given. We'll see what that gives. On our end, my job is always to make do with what we have. If the city insists on going forward with this, my job will be to make sure it's the least disastrous possible for downtown.
Well, that's optimistic. The least disastrous option possible. I'm from your point of view as a merchant, you've obviously talked to other people. I heard Alain Creton, who represents merchants on Peel Street, basically saying the same thing about how could they go. And by the way, to your point, Glenn, yes, I asked the city and they said, yeah, we'll get back to you. And obviously nobody ever did. That's the same situation you're in. Or will you organize other merchants to get together to fight this?
We will try, but let's look at one thing. We have very strong representation here with Glenn Castanheira. So the representation is there. The voice is there now to speak about these things.
But we have a voice before, I should point out, for Glenn and your group was there. I mean, nobody ever spoke out on behalf of merchants, so I mean...
Well, let's look at the process of consultation itself. When I started attending meetings about different issues downtown, I started getting engaged a little bit over the last 4 years and attending these meetings. My first observation was that there were no merchants present at these consultations and at these meetings. So that was my first observation. And I was saying there was CEOs, there was people from the city, there were no merchants. So at one point I was at a meeting and there was a question period and I asked at this question period because they were evaluating certain things about the city, downtown, and how to move forward and how to bring prosperity back downtown. And my question was, who in this room of about 100 people is an investor in a downtown business, who is paying rent and who is paying salaries by show of hands? And there was nobody. And I'm talking about zero. I was expecting maybe one person, but zero. So when we talk about a process of consultation, this is not a citywide process of consultation. When we're talking about a neighborhood like downtown Montreal, I repeat, once upon a time the most prosperous in the country, when we're talking about the neighborhood, we need to consult the people of the neighborhood. And by that I mean the people who invest, the people who create jobs, the people who have stores, and the people who use it. Now, this is very important, the using part, because there's people who have opinions that they will never use downtown. They never come downtown. For them, it's they don't like it, but they'll have plenty of opinions about it, but they will never come. So how do we create a process of consultation where we're not only consulting the merchants that invest, the people who live in it, but also the people who use it? And there's ways of doing this. And what those users want to see in the city, not what some person who lives super far away dreams of
It has a
downtown.
hypothetical
and
idea of it.
hypothetical
Yeah.
view.
Yeah.
And I want to speak here to the people who have reacted to this, because I understand that there's many people have received backlash for saying they don't want to close St. Catherine. There have been, I don't know what, profiteers. I don't know what we are. Anyway, I want to speak to those people. When you see one store out of 4 closed, 25%, 24% closure, very, very high. Behind every closure, there's a human story. I ran a business that had to close, and I know the pain. I know the pain leading up to the closure, how much you struggle to keep it alive, and I know the pain after you close it. So I want to invite people to think about that when they look at closed stores and at closed spaces, the pain that is there, and the families that tried to open, the families that had to close, what that cost them. For what? For trying to build something exciting in the city? For trying to create work?
For trusting.
For trusting the city? And there's things that can be done, and I just don't want to rant, because there's things that can be done. Like, for example, you see towers, condo towers going up left and right. Left and right. Simple thing. We have a ground floor. That ground floor needs to be fertile for prosperity. So why not impose conditions to the developers of the towers about the ground floor? For example, you want to have a tower here? No problem, we'll give you a permit. But you're going to subdivide your ground floor into smaller spaces so local merchants don't have to rent 3,000, 5,000, 6,000 square feet. Subdivide them into smaller spaces. Then you're going to charge lower rents on the ground floor, because where there was only one floor, now there's 30 floors of condos. So you're making a lot more money. The city's making a lot more money in city taxes than before. So why not give a break to the ground floor? For example, charge rent as a percentage of sales for a period of time. Why not? Why doesn't the city say, for example, in exchange, we'll give you a break on municipal taxes so that ground floor will be taxed less? So there's a number of measures that can be put in place to create prosperity before we put plans.
Why aren't you running?
Yeah, exactly.
Why aren't you running with on Montréal, for example? I mean, if you talk with people who understand business and it's good for the city that they do, why aren't you involved more? I'm not.
Yes.
I'm just suggesting.
Well, he's
Go to
busy
council
running a
meetings.
business.
Right. Okay.
Well, I'm here. Glenn is here. We're talking, and we're talking behind the scenes with people.
Look, Serge Sasseville is very much involved, and nobody listens to his voice, and he's out there all the time.
And that's his
time.
district. He's downtown.
But I'm
He
saying,
lives there and
and yet
represents the people.
he's not consulted. It's his area, and nobody listens. So,
Are
and
we
he's an
doomed
elected
here?
official.
Valerie Plante aside, who says she's not going to run.
Yeah.
Are we doomed here? If Projet Montréal wins the next election for these kinds of policies to continue, do you think?
Well, yes, probably because
You?
No, but
I'm asking him.
Yeah, but like you, yeah. Go ahead, Glenn.
I won't comment about partisan politics, so I won't comment Projet Montréal itself. I will say
But it's
this.
an ideology, right? I mean, it's dogma for
well,
them.
within, and knowing many of them, I know that within the team there are fractions, like in many other parties. I will say this, though, regardless of Projet Montréal, or Ensemble Montréal, mind you, right? I do, knowing what I know, and I swim with these groups for many years now. The radical right to the radical left is that we're seeing. It seems like we're entering the crossroads here, where either we intensify sub-representation, being that instead of having the population, Montrealers, decide their own fate, we're letting a few people decide. And what I mean when I say these few people, it can either be a few influent businesses. If you look to if I caricature the radical conservatives, that would say, it's only the Chamber of Commerce should choose. And there are people who think that way. And the other is, well, it is only our militants that we'll listen to. It is only our community groups that we'll listen to. And that is the two extremes we're seeing. What I would love to see is what we've seen in New York, what we're seeing happening now in San Francisco, what we're seeing in many other cities around the world, which is we need to move forward together. Make sure that we stay above polarization, because it's populism,
Right.
and that's what's happening.
But you're
Both
saying there are
sides.
divergent views, and it's funny
Yes.
you say that, because I don't hear that. I don't hear those other views. It's basically one mantra to it's our way or the highway, and that highway goes to Laval or the West Island. But and that's essentially the view I get.
Again, my job is to get along with everyone, and
Yeah.
I speak to everyone, and I can confirm that there are great people in every party, including in Projet Montréal, including in Ensemble Montréal, and that there are divergent opinions. This specific file, I can confirm, and I've had lunch meetings, coffee meetings, I was on a phone call on my way here. There are some very brilliant people in City Hall right now that are telling me, Glenn, j'en reviens pas. In French, j'en reviens pas qu'est-ce qui est arrivé. I only wish they could speak up in caucus. I hope they do. And I hope that everybody can just, hey, leave the ego behind, and let's just agree that we need to, that there's a mistake here. Let's just fix this. Everybody wins.
I would have asked something simple, but I don't think there's an answer to it, which is people hearing this who don't believe that the city would go ahead and do something like this without either trying it temporarily or actually widely consulting, right? Think to themselves, okay, can I somehow make my voice heard? What do I do? Who do I reach out to? I'm not sure there's an answer to that question.
We did have a consultation group who
Yeah. If you're one of the
just that
99% of the people left out of that, though, what do you do?
But
Where
look
do
at
you go?
with Mount Royal. I mean, there was a
Which leads you,
that-
do you even trust the public consultation
but
process
the,
in this
The
thing?
public came out strongly in
Yeah.
favor of not closing.
But the
No matter.
advantage, and this is a good example of Mount Royal, despite that, because consultation isn't veto. I mean, consultation, the biggest asset of consultation is having an environment where everybody can have a serene debate like this. Nobody's being called an idiot. Nobody's being called a communist or a fascist. We're just discussing, which is not what's happening now with St. Catherine Street. I feel a lot for people like you, people like Paul-André Goulet from Sport Expert, who spoke out publicly and are now being threatened of boycotts.
Really?
Oh, yes. And actually, I shouldn't give specific examples, but there are horrible things being said and done right now that if only we had had a transparent debate
Yeah.
where people would just express themselves, and that's what consultation allows for.
Right.
Everybody wins. You can only get the best idea come out of there. And if if consensus is no and the decision is yes, it's in connaissance de cause. It's yes because ABC. I heard you all. I will listen to you, but at least, hey, let's agree to disagree. Let's move on.
Who would be threatening sports experts for, why?
The
Just
things
for
I've
speaking
read.
out?
The things I've read, look, I don't want to do some bad comparison, but it's the same type of animosity we're seeing now with Israel-Palestine thing. If you see a business, we're seeing horrible things happen, it's the same tone. And that scares me a lot because we're talking about pedestrianizing a street here and asking to be consulted. And we're talking about business owners who are also residents of downtown saying, I was never consulted, I'm angry. And being said, well, you're putting your interests ahead of mine and I'm going to boycott you and I'm encouraging everybody to boycott you. That's sad.
I find it shocking that there would be Projet partisans who would be that irate about somebody speaking up. I mean,
And mind you, I don't know, just to be,
we
for the
don't know who
record, I
those
don't know if
people
they're
are. We don't know who
Projet
they are.
partisans.
no, but already, but
but-
who would be objecting? That's,
It's the polarization we're seeing, and that's what scares me
no,
most.
and it's-
You're
All right.
seeing it with homelessness. You're seeing it with everything else.
We have to wrap up. Maybe what we can do, and we've had the mayor on the podcast, by the way, before, so I'm sure if we reached out again to have her come on to address this situation, even though she says she's, no longer going to run for mayor in the next election, maybe we can get her on to talk about this.
But this
The
is
one
her
thing,
legacy.
By the way, the one thing we didn't bring up, and we're out of time, but in speaking to Michel Leblanc from the Chamber of Commerce, this idea of, that word fluidity for downtown, that's an interesting concept that hasn't existed downtown in I don't know how many years. There is zero fluidity. That's got to be a concern here too, right?
Yes.
This is only going to make things that are bad now even worse. That fair to say?
yes.
It is,
Okay.
especially for logistics. Just thinking about getting delivery in. Again, there are ways to have a pedestrian street where you can have trucks come in and make delivery, make service calls.
This is not that way.
Well, what the city, and Glenn, you pointed at this, there's a historical rift that has existed way before Valerie Plant. We're talking decades. There's a discomfort, there's a rift between the public spaces and the private sector in Montreal. They are seen at the administration level as antagonists. And that's not what happens in Europe. That's not what happens in New York. There's a conversation. It is the private sector that animates the public space. It's the private sector that creates the offer, the stores, the business, the restaurants, the bars that animate the public space. Montreal is one of the few places in the world where you cannot have coffee in front of the cathedral. Why can't we have coffee in front of a cathedral? Sit down at a table and chair and just have it there.
Glenn, why can't we?
Why can't we?
Oh, we need another section
Okay,
of this.
we'll leave it at that.
Why can't
Glenn
we?
Castanheira, Federico Sanchez, thank you both for
Thank you
joining
very
me.
much.
That wraps
Thanks,
up
Ray.
this edition of the Corner Booth Podcast. We'll see you again soon.